something about I believe the children of our future, songs like that.
For over 60 years, Shirley Caesar has been a pillar of the church and the music industry. But in a world of cancel culture and instant viral moments, even legends aren't safe from scrutiny. Recently, a wave of controversy has many fans wondering if the curtains are finally closing on her iconic ministry. Today, we're breaking down the facts, the rumors, and the reality of the situation. Is it really over for Pastor Caesar, or is this just another trial she's set to overcome? The untold struggles that shaped Pastor Shirley Caesar. Long before the fame, the influence, and the voice that would come to define generations, Shirley Caesar's story was already being written in a small home in Durham, North Carolina, where survival itself demanded strength. She was the 10th of 13 children, growing up in a house that was full, not just with people, but with pressure, responsibility, and the kind of early reality that doesn't wait for you to grow up first. Her father, Jim Caesar, was more than just a presence in the home. He was known in the community, a gospel singer with a voice people respected, a man they called Big Jim. But his life stretched far beyond music. He worked in tobacco fields, he preached, and he led as part of a gospel quartet. And somewhere in the middle of all that, he passed something down to his daughter that would stay with her long after he was gone. The passion for music, and more importantly, the drive to become something more than her circumstances allowed. That influence didn't last as long as it should have. When Shirley was just 7 years old, her father died suddenly, leaving behind a family that was already stretched thin. Her mother, Shirley Caesar, was dealing with her own struggles, living with a disability that made everyday life harder. And just like that, the weight of the household shifted. What followed wasn't a slow adjustment. It was immediate. Shirley stepped into a role she didn't choose, but understood she couldn't avoid. She formed a deep bond with her mother, caring for her in ways that went beyond what most children her age could even imagine. That connection stayed strong until her mother's passing in 1986. But it started in those early years when everything felt uncertain. And in the middle of that uncertainty, something else took shape. A decision. Quiet, but firm. She had told herself that even without a father, she would keep going. She didn't fully understand the world yet, but she understood struggle, and she understood resilience. That mindset became her foundation. To support her family, she began singing in local churches, introducing herself as Baby Shirley. It wasn't about building a career at that point. It was about survival, about showing up wherever there was an opportunity to bring something home. By 1951, she had already made her first recordings, a step that would mean everything later. But at the time, it was just another move to keep things going. Those years came with a level of independence that most teenagers never experience. From the age of 14, she was moving on her own, traveling for programs, and waiting through long nights in bus terminals with nowhere else to go. There was no comfort in it, no glamour, just patience, endurance, and the understanding that this was what it took. Her mother did what she could: a cherry Coke and a hamburger for the road, a place to return to, even if it was brief. And when Shirley made it back home, there was always something small waiting for her. A sandwich, a few cents for milk, and then it was back to school like nothing had happened. Through all of this, one thing never disappeared: the desire to learn, to build something beyond music. In 1956, she enrolled at North Carolina College to study business education, taking a step toward a different kind of future. But life had its own direction for her. 2 years later, she made the decision to leave and fully commit to her music career, a choice that would change everything that came next. That choice didn't just change her direction. It opened the door to everything that followed. How Shirley Caesar built an empire, from faith, fame, and fire. What started in small rooms filled with family and familiar faces didn't stay there for long. Shirley Caesar's voice carried, and once it did, it began to open doors she hadn't even gone looking for. Singing first for those closest to her, she slowly became Baby Shirley Caesar, a name that started traveling across the Carolinas as invitations kept coming in. There was something about her voice people couldn't ignore, but even then, her life stayed structured around discipline. School came first during the week, and the stage had to wait until the weekends. It was a balance she held onto tightly, because even with everything building around her, she was still just a young girl trying to do both. That balance didn't last forever. By 1958, at just 19, she made a move that would change everything. She approached Albertina Walker, a dominant force in gospel music and the leader of one of the most respected groups at the time, the Caravans. It wasn't a casual introduction. It was a moment built on confidence, timing, and a voice that spoke for itself. After hearing her sing a solo, Albertina didn't hesitate. She wanted Shirley in the group. And with that, a decision had to be made. Education or calling? Shirley chose the calling. Joining the Caravans placed her in a space where talent was not just expected but demanded. She wasn't surrounded by amateurs. She was working alongside names that already carried weight, voices that had shaped the sound of gospel music. And instead of shrinking in that environment, she found her place within it. Recording, performing, traveling, learning. It all became her new reality. During her time with the group, she contributed to songs that didn't just pass through audiences, but stayed with them. Sweeping Through the City stood out as a defining moment, followed closely by No Coward Soldier. These weren't just performances. They were declarations, and Shirley's voice was right at the center of them. But even in a group that successful, there was something building inside her that couldn't be contained forever. After 8 years, she made another decision that carried risk. She stepped away from the Caravans after being offered a solo recording contract with Hob Records. It wasn't just about independence, it was about direction. Her first LP, I'll Go, introduced a different side of her, backed by the institutional radio choir and filled with songs that lent heavily into both faith and identity.
Songs like Peter, Don't Be Afraid, Hold My Mule, and Don't Drive Your Mama Away, Faded Rose.
Tracks like Oh Peter, Don't Be Afraid and Choose Ye This Day didn't just showcase her voice, they revealed where she stood. And around this time, something else became clear. Her purpose wasn't only in music. Back in 1961, she had already recorded a sermonette titled Hallelujah, 'Tis Done. And that moment began to change how people saw her. She wasn't just a singer. She was becoming a preacher, an evangelist, someone whose voice carried both melody and message. When she left the Caravans, she didn't slow down. She filled that time with revivals, preaching, and building something that didn't rely on a group or a label. And in that process, her style became unmistakable. It wasn't polished in a way that felt distant. It was raw and energetic. She would shout, move, play the tambourine, stretch words, repeat sounds, and create rhythms that felt alive in the moment. It wasn't just about singing a song. It was about delivering something people could feel in their chest. By 1966, she fully stepped into that identity, leaving the Caravans behind and forming the Shirley Caesar Singers. This wasn't just a new group. It was her vision, her structure, her leadership. And soon, the recognition followed. In 1972, she won her first Grammy Award for her performance of "Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man from Galilee," a moment that confirmed what many already believed. She wasn't just part of gospel music. She was taking it in a whole new direction. A few years later, she crossed into a different space entirely with "No Charge," a song that reached beyond gospel and found its way into R&B and pop audiences. It was a reminder that her voice didn't belong in one lane. Still, success didn't mean satisfaction. Even with everything she had achieved, she felt limited. Hob Records wasn't taking her as far as she believed she could go, so she made another shift. In 1977, she signed with Roadshow Records, stepping into a more secular space with her album First Lady. The title itself carried weight. She was the first female artist on the label, and that alone set her apart. But the response wasn't what she expected. While the lyrics stayed rooted in gospel, the sound leaned into something different, something many within the gospel community weren't ready to accept. The music was labeled too worldly, and as a result, it struggled. DJs refused to play it, audiences hesitated, and the album didn't perform the way it could have. Still, one thing stuck: the title. First Lady followed her beyond that project, becoming something larger than the album itself. Promoters, announcers, and fans began calling her the First Lady of Gospel Music, and over time, it became part of her identity. Her second project with Roadshow, From the Heart, faced similar challenges, and at that point, it became clear that the direction needed to change again. So she found her way back. Signing with Word Records in 1980, she recentered her music fully within gospel, and this time, everything aligned. The hits came, one after another. God's got it all in control. Jesus, I love calling your name. He's working it out for you, and you're next in line for a miracle didn't just perform well, they became staples. Then there was Hold My Mule. At the time of its release, it was just another powerful track in her catalog. But years later, in 2016, it found a completely new life. A remix turned it into a viral moment, pushing her back to the top of the Billboard Hot Gospel Songs chart for the first time. It wasn't planned, it wasn't expected, but it proved something important. Her voice could still reach new generations. That same year, she released Fill This House, earning yet another Grammy nomination, adding to a list that had already grown to 28 nominations over the years. But even with all of this, she never lost sight of what she believed her real assignment was: ministry. After stepping away from group life, she made it clear that she wasn't trying to balance both worlds equally. Her focus shifted fully toward evangelism. She built her own church, Mount Calvary Word of Faith Church, in Durham, creating a space that reflected everything she had carried from the beginning. And beyond that, she established the Shirley Caesar Outreach Ministries, focusing on those in her community who needed support the most. Her work didn't stop at music or preaching. She stepped into education again, returning to school and graduating with honors from Shaw University with a degree in business administration. She also spent time studying at Duke University's Divinity School and received multiple honorary doctorates. It was a full-circle moment for someone who had once put her education on hold to follow a calling. And still, the recognition kept building. Grammy Awards, Dove Awards, Stellar Awards, appearances alongside some of the biggest names in music, performances for every U.S. president since Jimmy Carter, acting roles in films and television. It became a career that stretched across decades without losing its core. But through all of it, one thing stayed consistent: the message she carried. She often spoke about responsibility, about living in alignment with what you preach. Those words weren't new to her. They came from her mother, a voice that stayed with her long after she was gone. The reminder that people were watching, that expectations weren't just external, but spiritual. That you couldn't stand in front of people and say one thing while living another. And that stayed with her, not just as advice, but as a standard. Even in her outreach work, that same mindset showed up. She understood that she couldn't fix everything and couldn't reach everyone, but she could do something, and that something mattered. That understanding didn't just guide how she served, it carried into the kind of life she was building for herself. Inside Shirley Caesar's life after fame, love, loss, and a legacy still growing. As her influence continued to grow beyond music and into ministry, another chapter of Shirley Caesar's life began to take shape, one that brought both stability and partnership into a journey that had long been defined by movement and responsibility. In June 1983, she married Bishop Harold Williams, a man whose own path in ministry aligned closely with hers. Together, they built more than just a marriage. They built a shared purpose. At the center of that purpose was the Mount Calvary Word of Faith Church, where they served side by side as co-pastors, leading a congregation that grew to about 1,500 members. This wasn't something that came together overnight. The church itself carried its own history, and Bishop Williams had stepped into leadership years earlier under meaningful circumstances. He had been chosen by his predecessor, Bishop Johnson, who placed him in that role just weeks before his passing in 1972, a decision that would shape the direction of the church for decades to come. Together, Shirley and Harold created a rhythm that blended leadership, faith, and community. Their work wasn't limited to sermons or Sunday services. It extended into the lives of the people they led, building a church that wasn't just attended, but depended on. And while Shirley never had children of her own, her role within the church and her family life reflected something just as deep. Through her marriage, she became a stepmother to 2 children, stepping into that role with the same sense of responsibility that had followed her since childhood. Then, in July 2014, everything shifted again. Bishop Harold Williams passed away, and just like earlier moments in her life, Shirley was faced with loss that carried both personal and spiritual weight. But by this point, resilience wasn't something she had to learn. It was something she had experienced. And once again, she continued forward, holding on to the foundation they had built together. Beyond the church, her sense of purpose extended into other spaces as well. As a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, she remained connected to a wider network rooted in service and community impact. But even with those affiliations, her deepest influence could still be traced back to one person: her mother. The lessons she carried from those early years never left her, especially when it came to giving. That mindset shaped how she approached her success. A significant portion of what she earned from concerts didn't stay with her. It was redirected into her outreach ministries, a decision that reflected a long-standing belief that what she had been given was meant to be shared. Over time, her role within the church began to evolve. She didn't step away, but she adjusted. Recognizing the demands of both ministry and her continued presence in music, she appointed an executive pastor to handle weekly sermons, allowing the church to remain steady while she continued serving as senior pastor. It was a shift that showed awareness, not withdrawal. She understood how to keep things moving without losing control of what mattered. And even with those adjustments, she never disconnected from the work itself. Her annual Outreach Ministries conference continued, growing into something that reached far beyond a single event. It became a system of support for people who needed it most, providing food, clothing, shelter, toys for children, and financial assistance. These weren't occasional gestures. They were consistent efforts that reflected the same values she had carried since she was a child, helping her own family survive. She even expanded that vision in practical ways, opening a store under her name and using its profits to support those in need during the holiday season. It was another extension of the same idea. That impact doesn't always have to be loud to be meaningful, but it has to be real. And through all of this, even after decades of success, recognition, and responsibility, there was still something ahead of her. When asked what she still hoped to accomplish, her answer wasn't complicated. She expressed a desire to do more acting, a reminder that even after everything she has done, she still sees room to grow, to explore, to step into new spaces. And that might be what stands out the most. Because for someone whose life has already covered so much ground, she hasn't approached it like something that's finished. Instead, it continues to unfold, shaped by the same drive, the same faith, and the same determination that carried her from the very beginning. Shirley Caesar's painful family, battle after loss, what really happened. For someone who had spent her entire life holding people together, Shirley's hardest moment didn't come on stage, and it didn't come in the spotlight. It came quietly, after the applause had faded, after the ministry had been built, after the man she shared it all with was suddenly gone. In 2014, when her husband, Bishop Harold Williams, passed away, it wasn't just the loss of a partner. It was the loss of structure, of companionship, of the one person who had stood beside her through years of leadership and responsibility. And for someone like Shirley Caesar,
I had to believe that God was working behind the scene, and for those
whose life had always been rooted in service and stability, that kind of absence doesn't just leave a gap. It changes everything. And almost immediately after this loss, the piece she had built around her life began to unravel. What followed, according to reports, was a difficult and deeply personal battle over her husband's estate, one that placed her in direct conflict with her own stepchildren. This wasn't a distant disagreement. It was close, emotional, and complicated. The kind of situation that forces private pain into the open. For a woman who had spent decades preaching unity, forgiveness, and faith, being pulled into a family dispute like that would have carried a weight that went far beyond legal issues. Because this wasn't just about property or control. It was about relationships breaking under pressure. And at the same time, another kind of pressure was building from the outside. False stories about her death began circulating online, spreading quickly in a way that only the internet allows. For someone still very much alive, still working, still leading, it created a strange and unsettling reality where her name was being attached to narratives she had no control over. But what cuts deeper than public rumors is what happens within your own circle. There were also accusations that surfaced from within her extended family, claims that she had used her mother's pain as part of her public image. Whether those claims held weight or not, the fact that they came from people connected to her history made them harder to ignore. Because when criticism comes from strangers, it can be dismissed. When it comes from family, it lingers. And that's where the emotional weight of this chapter really sits. Because when you look at where she came from, everything about her story was rooted in family. She was one of 13 children, raised in a home where survival depended on togetherness. After losing her father at a young age, she grew even closer to her mother, stepping into a role that required care, patience, and sacrifice. That bond wasn't just strong, it shaped how she saw the world, She often reflected on her mother as the center of everything, holding the family together even when they had very little. In her own words, she remembered her mother as someone who kept them united, even when life was hard and resources were scarce, a presence that made survival possible. But aside from the loss of her parents and her husband, Shirley has lost all her siblings. And when you put that into perspective, it adds another layer to everything she has faced. Because loss, for her, didn't come once. It came in waves. First her father, then her mother, then her husband, and over time, every single sibling. Each one a piece of her past, a connection to where she started, gradually disappearing. So when conflict rises in the middle of that, it doesn't exist on its own. It connects to everything that came before it. For someone who gave so much of her life to others, who committed a large portion of what she earned to helping people in need, the idea that peace could still feel out of reach says a lot about the kind of battles that don't show on the surface. Because generosity doesn't always protect you from conflict. Faith doesn't always prevent loss. And influence doesn't always keep relationships intact. And sometimes, the pressure doesn't come from loss at all. It comes from how quickly things can turn in the public eye. It's over for Pastor Shirley Caesar. Take a look. For someone who built her name on control, discipline, and a message that never wavered, 2017 introduced a different kind of pressure. The kind that doesn't come from within, but from how quickly the world can take something and turn it into something else. And for many watching it unfold, this was one of those moments that made people stop and ask if things were starting to slip. It all began with a viral moment that didn't feel dangerous at first. The hashtag #YouNameIt challenge took off from a clip of Shirley Caesar performing "Hold My Mule," a moment where her improvised lines about food turned into something the internet couldn't stop repeating. It spread fast and crossed into mainstream culture, and suddenly her voice was everywhere again, reaching people who had never stepped into a church or listened to gospel music before. But the same moment that brought attention also brought confusion. A report from CBS 46 claimed that a $5 million lawsuit had been filed in her name in Georgia, targeting an Atlanta-based producer, DJ Suede, who had created one of the most popular remixes tied to the challenge. According to the report, he was profiting off the track, selling it while also pushing a video that showed scenes of twerking and alcohol use, imagery that stood in direct contrast to everything Shirley Caesar had consistently spoken against.
The law was not with us. It wasn't on our side.
And just like that, the story shifted. What looked like a viral success suddenly turned into a legal controversy, and her name was placed in the middle of it. But when she finally addressed it, the reality came out differently. She made it clear that no lawsuit had been filed. What actually happened was a move to protect her image, an injunction put in place to stop the commercial use of the remix and to remove a video that didn't reflect who she was. The issue wasn't just about someone using her voice, it was about how that voice was being presented to the world. She explained that once requests to take down the content were ignored, action had to be taken to protect her legacy and everything her name represented. She made it clear that she did not endorse the imagery in the video, especially anything tied to alcohol or behavior that conflicted with her message, and that having her voice attached to it created a false impression that she could not allow to stand. At the same time, she pointed out that while she had every right to sue, she chose not to, making it clear that the goal wasn't to escalate the situation, but to correct it. Still, even with that clarification, the remix remained online, continuing to circulate on platforms like iTunes and YouTube, a reminder of how difficult it is to pull something back once it has already spread. And that's where things became complicated. Because even though there was a clear difference between what was reported and what actually happened, the damage in perception had already been done. The narrative had already moved, and in a space driven by speed, correction doesn't always travel as far as the original story. At the same time, she found a way to redirect some of that attention. She released merchandise connected to the viral moment and used the proceeds to support people in need, turning a situation that could have stayed negative into something that still aligned with her purpose. But 2017 didn't stop there. Not long after, she stepped into another moment that quietly added to the tension surrounding her name. While preaching at a church in Maryland, her words began to touch on issues that were already sitting in a sensitive place publicly. She spoke about mistakes, about how people respond to certain decisions, and reflected on how some conversations should have happened earlier, referencing the shift in national acceptance around same-sex marriage. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Because at that exact time, another gospel figure, Kim Burrell, was already facing intense backlash after a sermon condemning homosexuality went viral, drawing criticism from major names in entertainment and leading to canceled appearances. That situation had already opened a wider conversation, and when Shirley Caesar spoke, her words were naturally pulled into that same space. And once again, what was said inside the church didn't stay there. It spread, it was interpreted, and it became part of a larger discussion that she didn't fully control. But what stood out in that moment wasn't just what she said. It was what she admitted afterwards. She acknowledged that she was learning to slow down, to think before speaking. Because once words are released into this kind of environment, they don't belong to you anymore. They move on their own, reaching people far beyond the original audience. She even suggested that pastors might need to take extra steps before delivering certain messages, including limiting access to phones during services, not out of secrecy, but out of an understanding of how powerful a single recording can become once it leaves the room. And when you put all of this together, the viral moment, the legal confusion, the public clarification, and the sermon that reached further than intended, it starts to explain why questions began to form. The attention wasn't coming from a loss of voice or a decline in influence. It was coming from a shift in the space around her, one where a single moment could be pulled out, reshaped, and sent far beyond its original meaning. And navigating that kind of shift doesn't always happen quietly. So when people ask if it's over for Pastor Shirley Caesar, moments like these are what they point to. Are you a fan of Pastor Shirley Caesar's music and her teaching? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.